The European Commission has issued a rebuke to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for the direct and personal threats he's made towards Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. The Commission said the Ukrainian president's threat to use physical force against the leader of the EU member state was not acceptable. Viktor Orbán is blocking a €90 billion loan to Ukraine, which, of course, is fighting off a Russian invasion. Here's the Ukrainian president in his own words.
We hope that one person in the European Union will not block the €90 billion and that Ukrainian fighters will receive weapons. Otherwise, we will give this person's address to our guys so they can call him and speak to him in their language.
OK, well, the rebuke from the European Commission comes at a moment of high tension between Hungary and Ukraine. This week, Hungarian authorities arrested 7 Ukrainian nationals who were carrying roughly $82 million in cash and gold. Ukrainians are suspected of money laundering, and Kyiv has accused the Hungarian government of taking them hostage. According to officials, the detained individuals were employees of Ukraine's state-owned Oshad Bank. They were travelling from Austria to Ukraine in 2 armoured vehicles. Ukrainian authorities say the cash transport was part of routine operations between state banks. Oshad Bank confirmed that Hungarian authorities have seized $40 million, €35 million and 9 kilograms of gold. Well, Kyiv and Budapest are currently locked in a bitter dispute over Hungary's access to Russian oil via a pipeline that runs through Ukrainian territory. Oil deliveries through the Druzhba pipeline have been halted since late in January. Ukraine says the stoppage is the result of a Russian drone strike that damaged the pipeline's infrastructure. Kyiv argues that repairing the damage would put Ukrainian technicians at risk, and even if it was fixed, the route would still be exposed to future attacks. Budapest, however, isn't convinced. They accuse Kyiv of deliberately obstructing the flow of Russian crude, and they're threatening retaliatory action against Ukraine until the oil starts flowing again. Well, our Brussels correspondent Ferenc Gaál was at the briefing when the Commission rebuked the Ukrainian president. Welcome, Ferenc. So tell us more about who said what.
Yes, the Commission's spokesperson made it very clear that they are not happy about President Zelensky's comments. They called them unacceptable. They said any threat to any EU member state was something that they would not condone. So this was a very clear point in direct response to the president's statements. Now, they also called on both sides, meaning Hungary and Ukraine, to dial down the hostile rhetoric, which they said is not conducive at all to finding a solution, which the EU Commission says is still their goal. They said that, the tensions that have really been escalating on a verbal level, especially between these two countries, are really a problem. And, they are expecting both countries to act in a way that makes it possible to find a solution in this conflict around the pipeline.
But here's the thing, isn't the EU supposed to be reducing its dependence on Russian oil because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? So what has been the Hungarian position on that?
So the Hungarian position has been that they claim they are, for economic reasons, for infrastructure reasons, the Russian oil is the only way for them. Now, there is a lot of counter-arguments, and most countries have actually managed to get off Russian oil, even though if they were historically dependent on it. But Hungary has not really made efforts in that direction, even after the war started. The EU's position is very difficult because, on the one hand, it is sanctioning Russia, it is taking steps to get off of Russian oil, Russian fossil fuels, but it then also has to kind of represent Hungarian interests in a way, as a member state, in calling on Ukraine to repair the pipeline and get the Russian oil flowing again to an EU member state, which, of course, is a slightly ambivalent and difficult position.
OK, so what options does Brussels have then if Hungary continues to block aid to Ukraine?
It's difficult because on the level of exerting pressure on Hungary, the EU really has used most of the levers it has, because most of the EU funds that Hungary would get are already frozen over rule of law issues, mainly corruption suspicions, these kind of things. So in this case, around the pipeline, it is very likely that the EU would have to kind of give Hungary something that they want in exchange then for Hungary lifting the veto. One possibility could be, of course, that Ukraine gets the pipeline operational again and then Hungary lifts the veto. Another option would be that the EU maybe approves a multi-billion-dollar defense loan for Hungary that they're still waiting for, and then that could maybe shift Budapest's stance in this whole dispute. But as of now, it's not really clear what path the Commission could choose, but they said they're working on it.
And a word then about all this Ukrainian cash and gold that is now in Hungarian hands. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, so it's easy to understand why that might raise eyebrows. You know, a truck full of cash and gold crossing an EU country to get to Ukraine. But it's actually not all that unusual if you think about the fact that a lot of people in Ukraine, for example, like to have their money in harder currencies like euro and dollar because they're simply more stable and retain their value. So this bank, which Ukraine claims has just been conducting a regular transport from Vienna to Ukraine, this bank is in need of cash in euro and in dollar so that people can have their money in these currencies. So it's not actually necessarily a sign of illicit activities or money laundering. Now, the Hungarian side, of course, claims that they have suspicion of money laundering. This is why they intervened. This is why they detained people. And for now, they have seized the money, but it is unclear what they will do with the money in the future.
OK, good talking to you, Ferenc. Thanks for talking us through that. DW Brussels correspondent, Ferenc Gaál. OK, so that's the gold. What about the Druzhba pipeline? OK, you've never heard of it, but Dr. Benjamin Schmitt definitely has. He's served as European Energy Security Advisor to the US State Department. He's currently a senior fellow with the Democratic Resilience Programme at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. And when he's not doing that, he's also a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. Busy man, Ben. Welcome back to DW. People will be
Always
surprised.
Glad to be here, Phil. Great to see you.
People
Great
will
to
be
see you, Phil. So, look, I'm not here to talk about the gold. As you said, I'm here to talk about the pipelines. But the Druzhba pipeline was hit by a Russian strike inside of Ukraine and has resulted in an outage of Russian oil transiting Ukraine to Hungary. And the Ukrainians are, by all accounts, trying to fix this. But this takes time, right? This is energy infrastructure that has once again been targeted by a kinetic, overt strike by the Russian Federation. And oh, by the way, these are the sort of concerns that we've had for many, many years, not only about European dependence on Russian energy resources, things like oil and gas, but also Russian energy infrastructure. They have the ability to weaponize both things. And in this case, they actually struck their own, ostensibly their own pipeline, the Russians, and created this rift between Budapest and Kyiv just at a time that Orbán is trying to solidify power and go towards this next election.
OK, so people are going to be surprised that Ukraine is still allowing Russia to pump oil through its territory while Russia is bombing it. How does that work?
Well, look, I mean, this is part of an artifact of what the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, a few of them, in this case Hungary, have been pushing for the entire time, right? As the rest of the continent has phased out Russian oil and has phased out Russian gas, countries like Hungary and Slovakia have pushed back and, in fact, have used other EU support to Ukraine, whether it be this loan that's currently in question or sanctions packages on the Russian Federation, to abstain from supporting Ukraine and instead trying to use that as blackmail to continue Russian oil and in some cases gas flowing to those countries. And so, yeah, there's still Russian oil flowing across that. That shouldn't be the case. This shouldn't even be in question, Phil, because the Hungarians should have been going along with the EU and outlawing these large imports of Russian crude oil a long time ago, right. Again, as we've entered the fourth year of this conflict.
And so does Ukraine realistically have any chance of shutting the flow of oil through this pipeline?
Well, I mean, in this case, this was a strike by the Russians on this pipeline, and the Ukrainians, probably against their better judgment, are trying to restore that flow because they realize that that they want to be seen as a reliable energy partner, and making sure that infrastructure that is supporting going across Ukraine and supporting Europe is well and truly functional. Right, the Ukrainians are trying to look at themselves as a battery for Europe in, for example, the natural gas case, where they have huge gas storages that they want the Europeans to use. So they want to be seen in this way. But at the same time, these threats from Budapest against Kyiv are totally unacceptable at a time that Kyiv is unfortunately falling off the radar because of the conflict now in Iran.
Which brings me to my next point. So let's talk about what's going on in Iran, because we have now Israel and the United States bombing Iran. Iran effectively blockading the Strait of Hormuz, and we've seen over the last week oil prices jump up and down. So let's talk about the impact of that war on energy prices. How much worse could this get if this conflict spreads across the Gulf?
Well, I think this is going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better. I think that the United States has toyed with the idea, only announcing this in the past 72 hours or so, that they'd like to try to reopen the Straits of Hormuz by force if necessary, effectively to escort stuck oil and natural gas tankers out of the upstream side of the strait and move them out into the global market. That would be a huge signal that this is a sustainable conflict from the U.S. and Israel. And I think that both Washington and Israel want to hold up their end of the bargain on that front. But we've seen, we're in an acute phase right now, Phil, where we have the Kuwaitis that are running out of physical storage capacity, right? You're still bringing up that oil from the ground. Right. You have to put it someplace. If you can't put it in, export it in these tankers, it's going to be a problem.
But it's on that American offer. So it's one thing for America to say, yes, we will use the US Navy to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. Yes, we will put a battleship in there to protect you. It's quite another for these oil companies to say, well, do we want to risk this because ships are not cheap, and can we get the insurance?
That's a great question. I mean, these are the sort of things that I think are changing on a moment-by-moment basis, because it's not just about being in the littoral waters, right, in those waters of the strait itself. It's also, I think, what the U.S. military is doing right now is trying to basically push north of the strait the ability and target the sort of drone and missile launch facilities and capabilities that the Iranians have to kind of shoot these vessels at point-blank range. As soon as that becomes a longer range proposition, I think the U.S. will move in and help these vessels out. And I think that insurance companies will basically kind of ride the wave with everyone. But in addition to just the tankers, whether it be LNG cargoes or oil tankers, right, you also have these strikes against Arab states' energy infrastructure itself. And I'm going to in particular focus on Qatar, where we've seen Iran, I think very astutely so, attack Qatari LNG export facilities. And that's, a major source of European imports of global LNG, given that it is weaning itself off of LNG from Russia. It's almost all the way there. And, oh, by the way, just to mention this again, Vladimir Putin once again is weaponizing energy and announcing this week that on top of this, while musing that the Russian Federation may cut off just those last few percentages of Russian gas that's still trickling into the European continent at the same time. So never one to let a good conflict go to waste is Vladimir Putin.
In our last minute, Ben, I think it's important to make the point about energy prices, that it's not, if energy prices spike and stay spiked, this is not just about petrol prices, this is about everything.
That's right. I mean, so energy undergirds the global economy, and so everything rises and falls with the price of energy, right? And so this conflict, no doubt, is going to be seen as sustainable, or something that Washington and in Israel will have to rethink as we go forward, if those prices don't come down. Now, President Trump said today he's not worried. He thinks those prices will come down, but that's going to require the U.S. military to have a significant maritime littoral intervention to make sure that takes place in opening the Straits of Hormuz.
Good to talk to you again, Ben. Benjamin L. Schmitt from the Center for European Policy Analysis and the University of Pennsylvania.
Thanks so much, Phil.